Hello, Dominic here from the Bournemouth Writing Festival, and welcoming you to another of our YouTube interviews with a writing professional, a writer or author in our local area here in Dorset. I'm planning to release a new interview every Monday evening at 6 o'clock. So if you want to be notified of when this interview has gone live, then just hit the subscribe button, which is somewhere along the bottom there. Today, I'm delighted to welcome a literary agent who lives here in Bournemouth. Her name is Tanera, and welcome. Hello.
Hi, Dominic. Thank you so much for having me today.
No problem. Well, it's fantastic to have a literary agent down here in Bournemouth. So first of all, I just wanted to ask you, about your career journey and how you became an agent. What are the steps?
Yeah, so I think everyone has a slightly different path to it, in the same way that everybody has a different path to becoming a writer. I studied English at university, always wanted to work in the publishing industry, but very much thought I would go into editorial inside a publishing house. I think that's what everybody thinks, because it's really the only job that you know about at that age. I, after university, went to work for a team called Love Reading, who are a brilliant book review site. And I just would read the books. I would kind of collate all of the reader reviews, upload them to the website, do a lot of the back end stuff on the website. And I would write copy for the books as well. And I loved that. And I think that really kind of fired up that critique side of the job. I then moved to a small independent publisher called Little Tiger Press, who published children's books. So quite different to what I do now. And I worked in the production team there, so not on the editorial side. And I was there for 2.5, 3 years doing that. And even though that was very different to what I ultimately knew I wanted to do, it gave me such an insight into the mechanics of a publishing house and how all of the different departments interact with one another and each of their different roles and functions, and how you can really not manipulate, but work that to your advantage. So that was a really interesting and fun couple of years. And I then moved to Darley Anderson. So that was the first literary agency that I worked at. And I just was there to build up their women's fiction commercial list. So I started that from scratch, the list there, was sat at a desk and read submissions. So authors email in their chapters, or they post in their chapters, and a query letter, and I just sat and read those and would reply to any that I felt were publishable. And I was there for 7.5 years, and started Greenstone Literary in the last month. So it's all very brand new at Greenstone, but yeah, just been in the industry for over a decade, and it just felt like the right time for a slightly new challenge, doing what I love, but in a way that kind of really works for me and my clients.
Well, that's fantastic. What a journey you've had, and obviously really involved in lots of different aspects of the publishing world from the side that writers and authors don't often see. We'll talk about your new agency in a minute, but you said just then, when a submission lands on your desk, and some you take forward, some you don't, what gets you really excited when you see, like, what is there any kind of similarities of things which you go, my goodness, that's something which I want to find out more about?
There definitely is, yeah. And almost in a way that feels slightly unfair to authors who are maybe writing slightly quieter fiction, but more quality fiction. What really catches my attention is if there's a clear hook, and particularly if it's a clear hook or pitch that feels very original, that I'm not reading a lot in my inbox. So if it's something quite standout and quite different, that feels really exciting. If it's something that piques your attention in one line, and that not just piques your attention, but that will ask questions, and that feels like it's got legs to it as well as just that surface, that feels really exciting. And like I said, in some ways I think that does a disservice to slightly quieter books. And And it's not that we would turn those down initially at all. We would still read, obviously, the chapters and the synopsis. But I think something that grabs your attention in that one line is something that is normally a quick, the way that we filter is we kind of green flag the ones that we think are going to be kind of priority reads and try and get to them a little bit quicker. So that would be how we do it.
So where does that come from? Does that come from the covering letter, where you kind of get that kind of little feeling in your stomach, or does it come from the synopsis, or does it come from the first few lines of the chapters?
So for me, it normally comes from the cover letter. I normally read the cover letter first, just to get a sense of the book. Is this supposed to be a romance, or is this supposed to be a thriller? What is that key pitch, that key hook that the author is conveying, communicating to me? So often I'll get that kind of feeling in the cover letter. Once I've read the cover letter, I'll go to the chapters. So you might get that feeling in the chapters instead, if the cover letter hasn't necessarily done the book justice, or if it's slightly different. I then move to the synopsis almost as a kind of backup to confirm my thoughts on the rest of it. So if I love what I've read so far, I might not even read the synopsis. If I'm unsure about what I've read so far, I might have a look at the synopsis just to think, is there some great twist that's coming that actually, if we worked editorially, could be brought forward to make those opening chapters more engaging and more kind of immediately unputdownable. So for me, that's secondary. And I know that writers as well, normally it's the synopsis that they hate writing the most. So I do empathize. Not a fun task.
I mean, I meet so many writers throughout the year and at the writing festival, and yes, the synopsis, but also the covering letter. And I think a lot of people don't realize how important the covering letter is. But I know people that spend days kind of crafting their covering letter, and it's hard work, I have to say. So once you've can you please help explain the process? So, okay, so let's say that you like the covering letter, synopsis, and the first few chapters, and you say, right, I want to see your full manuscript. And then everybody gets excited, we send you the full manuscript. What happens next?
So, I mean, it sounds simple. I would read the full manuscript. If I get to 50% of the way through and I know that it's not for me, I might stop there and I would go back to the author. I try, if I've requested the full, to give feedback as to why I wouldn't be taking it forward. So for instance, it might be that the pacing isn't quite there, or that I don't feel a particular character is working, or I might get to a certain point and think, actually, this sounds really similar to something else that I've taken on, or to a published book, and actually I don't feel that we could sell that based on that. So I would try and come back with feedback to that effect. If it's something that I feel the author could work on and resubmit, then I will say that. And my approach is always, this is your book, this is your story, they're your characters. I don't want you to make changes that you don't agree with or that you don't feel are authentic to that. But if you would like to work on this element that I feel is the reason that I can't take it forward, and then resubmit, then I'd be really delighted to reread, knowing that those changes have happened. If we read the full and we love it, then the next phase would be for me to speak with the author. So making sure that you have a good rapport with the person that you'll be working very closely with, for me, is very important. If there are any editorial changes that I foresee being needed before we submit to a publisher, then I would want to talk to the author at that stage about the changes as well. Make sure that we'd be on the same page editorially, that they would be happy to make those changes, and just get a sense of what the author wants from an agent. Can I offer that? What ambitions do they have? What are they writing next? Would we be a good fit longer term? And if all of that feels positive at that stage, then I would offer representation. And did you want me to talk about from that stage as well, or does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to keep talking about that, definitely. But I think so a lot of people ask me, when they should get an editor, when they should get a proofreader in. And so what's your advice on when a writer should start to get professional advice? And so for me, I didn't get professional advice. I'd sent it out to submissions, to see if my writing was good enough, before I spent a lot of money. A lot other people say, well, actually, maybe you should hire an editor or a proofreader or a developmental editor first before you start submitting. So I guess the question is, how polished should it be for it to land on your desk?
That's a really good question. And as with most things in publishing, there is no clear-cut right or wrong. What I would normally suggest is to have a writing group, or to have people, maybe friends or family, if you trust that they'll be totally honest with you and won't be afraid to critique, who you can send your manuscript to before submitting it to anybody, just to get that slightly more objective view on it, because you as the writer are so immersed in your story, you know it so well that you will stop seeing what's on the page versus what you know about your characters and the plot. And you'll have edited it, hopefully, a couple of times already, and you might have taken things out on the page that, again, you still know in your mind. And so to have someone read it totally fresh, who doesn't have any of that context, that backstory, they will be able to easily point out to you, oh, this character's just come in on page 50 and they've not been introduced previously. Who are they? And, actually, why is this plot point coming in on page 300? Why don't you bring that forward? And they'll just see these things that, because you're so close to it, you won't necessarily see for yourself. So I think it's really helpful for someone else to read before you submit. That doesn't have to be a paid professional. We don't expect anything to have been edited professionally before it comes into our submissions inbox at all. I think if you want to do it at that stage pre-submission, that's great and might make a difference. But otherwise, I really think a lot of it is about fresh eyes and about taking the advice and feedback when it comes, if you agree with it, I would say.
And that's so important, because it is somebody's opinion, and you have to make a decision whether you agree with that or not. And so we have a private Facebook group for writers within the Bournemouth Writing Festival community, and a few people, including myself, have put a question that said, would anybody like to read my manuscript, for those fresh eyes, exactly as you said. And is when 3 or 4 people say exactly the same thing, that's when you think, oh, maybe I should think about that. But there's lots of groups out there as well on Facebook where you can buddy up and swap your manuscripts with other people. I've done lots and lots and lots of swaps with people just to have that outside perspective. So so let's go back to, okay, so let's say you've hit the jackpot and you think, wow, this is amazing, I'd like to represent you. What happens next?
So if the author says yes to representation, then what we would do next is work editorially on the manuscript. So the vast majority of the time, we will work on it before sending it out to publishing houses. It would have been a conversation we've had at point of offer. Sometimes the edits are relatively minor. Sometimes they're a little bit more drastic. So, for instance, we've worked on changing the ending of a book before, which the author was happy to do. Once we feel that we've got the manuscript in as strong a place as possible before I submit it to publishers, then that would be the next stage, to send it to publishers. So during that editorial process, I'll be meeting with editors. I've got contacts, friends in the industry who I'll meet with on a regular basis, talk to on a regular basis. I will start trailing the manuscript to them. So I will start saying, I've got this fantastic, high concept rom-com that's coming, that's set in Manchester and blah, blah, blah. And, is that something that you would like to read? And they'll say, oh my gosh, yes, I'm looking for something like that. Or they'll say, actually, I've just acquired a high concept rom-com, but my colleague X is looking for one. So I'm just starting to put feelers out there, make sure it's something that editors are keen for, putting it in their minds, giving them the title, giving them the name of the author, and just starting to compile my list of editors that I think would be a good fit and that I know would be interested in reading the manuscript. Once we've got to the point where the manuscript's ready to go out, I will compile my submission in the same way, similar way that authors compile theirs. So I'll be putting together, I'll obviously make sure the manuscript is as polished as possible. I'll be writing my cover letter, which includes my pitch for the book, my comp titles for the book, anything else that'd be relevant for each individual editor to know. And I'll be including normally a line or two about the author's next work as well, just to give the publisher a sense that this author is committed, they're keen, they're already writing the next one, and they're going to be a good person to work with. When all of that's ready, I'll share it with publishers, and then I wait. So again, in the same way that authors are waiting to hear back from agents, I'm waiting to hear back from publishers. And we'll get rejections trickle through. And again, that their responses can sometimes be conflicting. So one might say, I didn't feel emotionally connected to this. Others might say, I cried throughout, but actually it was this character, and so you've got to always take a little bit pinch of salt sometimes, and just really listen to the feedback that actually rings true to you. And then if we get an offer or several offers, then we take it forward from there, dependent on the situation.
It sounds so involved, and there's so many steps. So I've got two questions really. The first one is, so when you start to go through the editorial process, is that at your cost and therefore your risk? And my second question is, what's the timelines on that? I know there's probably how long's a piece of string, but what would a wannabe writer expect in terms of timelines?
Okay, so your first question about the cost, I will edit the manuscript myself. So I'm not hiring an editor externally. There isn't a cost as such, but agents are working for free until the manuscript sells. So that is the only kind of risk on my part, is that I might be working on something and putting my time into something that doesn't then subsequently sell. But that is part and parcel of being an agent. Some agencies might have in-house editors. So they might have someone whose job purely it is to work across the client lists manuscripts. Some agents will sometimes sub out the work to a freelance editor. So if I'm really busy and I think actually I really believe in this, but it needs more work than I can afford it, then I might sub out to a freelance editor, and that cost would be mine unless otherwise agreed with the author. And then timelines. Yes, how long is a piece of string? If an author works full time and they could only do an hour of work a week, it might be that it takes several months to get something ready. If they turn it around in a week, I try to always get back on things within a couple of weeks of receiving the manuscript. It might be up to a month, but my kind of hoped for time is 2 weeks to turn something back to an author. So normally that process takes anywhere between 2 and 6 months, depending on how quickly the author can work, how busy I am, how many rounds of edits there might be.
Blimey, wow. And so how do you manage your time? So kind of rough percentages to kind of reading new submissions through to editing and kind of doing all of that stuff to get it published. What percentages of roughly would you say your time is doing each of those things?
Yeah, so, and again, this will vary agent to agent. And if someone has a very established list and they're not necessarily looking to take on lots of new material, new authors, they might allocate a lot less time to reading new submissions. If someone's newer and building their list, they might spend half of their time reading in order to try and build. I would say that for me personally, probably spend a couple of hours a week on reading new material from my submissions inbox. If I've requested the full of something, then obviously that will take longer on top of that couple of hours. And then the rest of that really is existing client work. So that would be reading existing client manuscripts. So once you've sold book 1, the author's then writing book 2, and I would normally read book 2 and feedback on book 2 before that then goes to the publisher. So I'll be reading and editing existing client work as well, to an extent, not always, depends on the situation. Even if I'm not editing, I'll be reading the client work to make sure that I can have an authoritative voice in any editorial conversations with the publisher. Make sure that if the author wants to talk to me because they're not happy with something the publisher suggested, that I can have that conversation. And then other than that, it would be maybe contracts, emails about covers, about sales, about anything the author might want to talk about. But a lot of reading. Wow.
So in terms of the kind of of the pressures that you face, some of the challenges that you face of being an agent? Obviously, monetary is going to be one big thing, you know, in your investment. But what else are you? What are your other challenges and pressures?
Oh, it's a good question. I mean, time pressures always, because it's not the type of job where you will just cross off everything on your to-do list and then you'll be done for the day. There is always more to be doing, always more to be reading. And so time is a big one. Money is a big one. I think for me, it's the pressure of wanting your authors to succeed as well. So in the same way that authors, you know, it's horrible being out on submission, I feel that as well. When I've got clients' work out on submission, I'm so conscious that the author knows that it's out, that they're waiting to hear, I'm waiting to hear. I want obviously positive feedback and to be able to sell that work for the client, and making sure that the clients are happy with how their publication journey is going as well, because obviously we're a cog in that, and agents, we are there to support, we're there to guide, we're there to push the publishers, make sure that we think they're doing a really good job and they're fulfilling their obligations to the author. But within that, we are not the publisher, so we are not ultimately the ones at the end of the day making those decisions. So there's only so much influencing, navigating that we can do, and you know, sometimes things don't work out the way that we want, and that's disappointing for us personally, as well as knowing that we've then got to have that conversation with the author as well. So I'd say that's probably one of the more difficult things about the job.
Yeah, I imagine you have a responsibility for the author, because the author is going to be so excited, and then, you know, all these different steps which could fail at any point and go away. So yeah, I can imagine the pressure there. So on a typical kind of moment in time, how many post full manuscripts, and when you're doing the editing, how many books or authors are you juggling at any one time? Is it, I imagine you can't have too many because it would just become unmanageable. So is it 3, 4, is it 10? Like how many books have you got in one go?
On the go. So my list at the moment is 15 clients. In terms of how many manuscripts I'm reading at the moment, I've got 4 on my to read list. So I'm reading 1 and I've got 3 waiting. Those are a combination of, so the one I'm reading at the moment has been edited by the publisher. So I'm just reading through to make sure I know what the novel is. So that will be a slightly quicker read because I'm not engaging as much editorially. I'm not reading it super critically. The other manuscripts I'm reading at the moment, one is from a prospective new client. So that's, I guess, you know, a submission manuscript. And then the other 2 are deliveries from clients on my list who I've been working with already, and these are their new books. So I'll be reading those more critically, and those will take a little bit longer. And then there are submissions on top of that as well. Great.
We're coming to the end. So I think, can you tell us what is your number 1 top tip for wannabe writers out there here in Bournemouth, part of the Writing Festival, and also one thing that you would advise people to avoid?
Okay, so number 1 top tip would be to read really widely and really know your genre, so that when you're submitting, you're confident that your material both simultaneously fits in and stands out from that. So you're offering something new, but you know that there's a market for it. And you can demonstrate that by giving comparative titles that you've read and that you know, and you just feel really confident as to why yours is special. And top thing to avoid would be, I guess just don't get too het up in, it's almost like the underside to my top tip. Don't get too het up in trends. So I think it's really easy to hear that, you know, World War II fiction is having a moment, and then think that you've got to switch to writing a World War II book. And then by the time you've written it, something else will be trending. So I think always stay true to what you really want to write. Yes, pay attention, read the market, know the market, but don't let it sway you to an extent that you're not writing authentically, because that ultimately, that consistency and that authenticity is what will help you reach success, I would say.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. And then lastly, so you started up a new literary agency. How exciting! It launched last week, I think. So tell us, like, you moved down from London down to Bournemouth. So tell us about the reasons why you decided to move down to the coast, but also why you decided to go out alone.
Thank you. Yeah, it did just, we've been working on it behind the scenes for a little bit, but it launched publicly last week, which was really exciting. So thank you. And yeah, so I was living in London and working in London before, throughout COVID, in a very small one-bed flat. And my husband and I just fell out of love a little bit with the city, as you do, because all of the reasons you're there, you can't enjoy anymore. And so we moved down to Bournemouth last year and absolutely love it. Being by the coast, how could you not? And it's great because we're still in reaching distance of London. So I was commuting 2 days a week, sometimes 3, into London from here. So, and I'm still able to do that for meetings and to meet publishers and authors in London if needed. But being able to work remotely is also really important, I think. And, making these types of connections with local communities as well, I think is fantastic. And so setting out on my own, I think it was time for a new, sorry, I can see the light on my face. I think it was time for a new challenge, really. And I'd been at Darley for just over 7 years. I learned so much there. And I just wanted to have a little bit more agency in terms of the decisions that I'm making sure that those are right for my clients, right for myself. And yeah, so we set up Greenstone, myself and Laura Heathfield, there's 2 of us. And Laura is really actively building a list, and I am always on the lookout for new clients. So yeah, do keep us in mind.
So what are you looking for?
That's a good question. We're both looking for commercial fiction on the whole. We're looking for the occasional, very select non-fiction, but really our focus will stay on the commercial fiction market. I'm looking more on the book club, rom-com, love story, historical side of things, and Laura is looking more on the crime thriller side of things. So there will be crossover. We work very closely together. So if you're unsure who to send to, just feel free to choose one of us, and we will share things back and forth between us anyway.
Amazing. Well, everyone here in Bournemouth and also at the Bournemouth Writing Festival wishes both of you the best of luck in your new agency. Thank you so much for giving us an unbelievable peek behind the curtain of what a literary agent actually does and some of the pressures, because I think the more we as writers and authors can know about what pressures and challenges you're facing and what you're looking for, hopefully, it makes it easier or facilitates it a little bit better. So thank you so much. So Tanera Simons, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed chatting to you, and yeah, look forward to more.
Oh, wonderful, and hope to see you involved in the Writing Festival at some point over the next year or 2 as well. If you're not too busy with all the different clients and books, and it would be wonderful actually to let us know if you do find somebody from Bournemouth or Dorset that you take through to publication, and let us know. We can publicise that for you as well. So thank you so much, and to everybody else, hopefully see you next Monday for another interview with a local writer, professional writer or author here in our local area. All right, thank you so much and take care.